Thank you, Sawako, and to everyone at Asia Society for hosting this timely and important event, and to Canon and Taku for sharing your precious time, and to all of you for joining us today. Let me just briefly introduce Canon and Taku and say a few words about the discussion we're going to have before turning the floor over to them. Canon Hersey is a photographer, fine artist, filmmaker, cultural organizer whose work bridges public art and social impact. As the grandson of the Hiroshima author John Hersey, Canon has continued his family's legacy through documentary series such as Hiroshima Revealed and this upcoming feature film, What Divides Us. His projects retrace his grandfather's footsteps while exploring the enduring human impact of the atomic bombing. So thank you, Canon, again for joining us. Taku Nishimae is a journalist, filmmaker, producer, a Peabody Award-winning journalist, filmmaker, and producer based in New York. He's currently producing this feature film, What Divides Us, telling this true story of an American journalist, John Hersey, and a Japanese reverend who were the first to reveal the human reality of the atomic bombing in Hiroshima. As the first Japanese-American co-production to center on this subject, the film is exploring truth, memory, and the possibility of hope in the aftermath of this tragedy. It's an honor to be moderating this session, marking the beginning of production, and to lead this discussion at a really, I think, pivotal moment. As for many Americans, the book Hiroshima by John Hersey played a really important role in my own understanding, my own awareness of the atomic bombings and their impact. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. I was thrilled to hear that Canon, John's grandson again, had taken up the challenging task of bringing this story to life on the big screen. And this year, of course, it's an opportune time to have this discussion. As you all know, it's the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War, the 80th anniversary of the atomic bombings. You all are probably familiar with the facts, but I think it's important to just set the stage a bit. So on August 6th, 1945, an American B-29 bomber known as Enola Gay loaded up a special payload nicknamed Little Boy. At 8:15 a.m., it released the bomb above the city of Hiroshima. 3 days later, America dropped a second atomic bomb known as Fat Man on the city of Nagasaki. These explosions, the first and only use of atomic weapons in wartime, eviscerated the cities and killed tens of thousands of people. The bombings came at the end of a long war. Japan had been fighting in China for years. It had bombed Pearl Harbor and entered war with America in 1941. And the bombings helped bring an end to those conflicts less than a week after Japan's emperor announced his country's surrender. But the toll was immense. An estimated 140,000 people had died in Hiroshima and another 74,000 in Nagasaki by the end of that year from the effects of the blast. And somehow, despite the destruction that was visited upon each other, these two countries became allies and even friends. And I think that friendship, the improbability and the possibility, is encapsulated in the personal friendship between John Hersey and Reverend Tanimoto Kiyoshi, a friendship that I understand lies at the heart of the film you're making. A number of stories are told about Hiroshima and about the bombings, and they're often divergent stories, especially in America and in Japan. The narratives have evolved, and they are not simple tales of good and evil. There is no black and white in this story. In Japan, the bombings became central to the story of the war, so much so that it sometimes can drown out or downplay the events that precipitated it, the atrocities that Japanese soldiers committed elsewhere in Asia. And in America, the Second World War was a good war, a simple tale of morality. And the atomic bombing, I think, complicates that tale of this being a purely good war. The basic story that many in American schools learn, that I learned growing up, is that Japan refused to surrender. America was preparing to invade the islands, the mainland of Japan after the Battle of Okinawa, and chose to save lives by dropping the atomic bombs. That doing so would have avoided massive bloodshed on the ground. Historians have since challenged that narrative, and many in Japan certainly believe that it was a narrative of false necessity, that Japan would have surrendered anyways. But crucially, in the sort of evolution of these narratives, the story of the reality of Hiroshima has never really been shown on the big screen to Americans. As it happens, my dad, who's a scholar at Stanford University, once led a big study on wartime memory in America and in Asia, and they looked at representations of the war in popular culture, for example. And when he asked the producers of the famous sort of miniseries, The Pacific and Band of Brothers, which told the story, showed the story of the war in great detail, why they hadn't had a part on Hiroshima, the answer was quite simple. There was no audience for it. Americans didn't want to see it. But I think it's so important that we do see it and that we finally will see it, thanks to the two of you. And it comes at a really crucial moment. Again, this 80th anniversary, I think, is an especially worrying time when it comes to nuclear fears and nuclear proliferation globally. As recently as 2009, Barack Obama won the Nobel Peace Prize in part for his efforts to bring about a nuclear-free world. I mean, it was possible to talk seriously of a world without nuclear weapons. Now, increasingly, we're talking of a third nuclear age, a nuclear age that's messier and more combustible than ever before. We see nuclear threats being made by Russia in Ukraine. We see the underlying sort of arms control architecture of the Cold War breaking down. We see America's nuclear umbrella, which has kept a lid on proliferation amongst allies, fraying, and talk of nuclear arsenals growing in places like Poland or South Korea. And I think the nuclear taboo, this shared moral revulsion at the use of nuclear weapons that has helped keep a lid on proliferation, it seems to be weakening. And I think it's not an accident that it's weakening as the voices of the witnesses, the voices of the hibakusha are growing quieter, as the memories of the reality of Hiroshima are fading. And I think for Japan especially, it brings a long-standing tension to the surface between the desire for disarmament on one hand and the need for deterrence in a dangerous neighborhood on the other hand. So keeping alive the memories, I think, of the hibakusha, the memories of the reality of Hiroshima on the ground is so incredibly important. And I hope this film will help to do that. So I'd like to turn it over to Canon and Taku to tell us a bit more about your journey, how you came to make this film. We'll chat a little bit here on stage and then open the floor to questions for all of you in the audience and those of you following online. So over to you, Canon. Thank you.
Well, thank you all very much for coming today. This is an important moment for us. Taku and I have been working together for 20 years, but on very deeply involved in the culture and the stories and the memories of Hiroshima for 11 years. It's been over 35 trips to Hiroshima in 11
40
years.
40 trips.
Over 40 probably at this point. And Hiroshima is like a second home, and it's not the place of a nuclear bomb only. It's a place of resilient culture, of people rebuilding, and of people building a brighter future. And it's really going to be a great honor to bring that story, not just the story in John Hersey's Hiroshima, of what it was like for those 6 survivors, but to show the life of John Hersey and Kiyoshi Tanimoto and how trust was rebuilt after an atomic bomb. I think we're going to start with a younger me from 10 years ago, from the first.
But let me quickly introduce some team members here. So we have Katsuhiro Tsuchiya. He's our co-producer. He's from NHK. He's a super veteran from NHK, but he's very famous for Ryomat and Yale, those Asadora. And he's a chief producer for a long time now. He joined us 3 years ago. So she's a chief producer. And Isabella Cooper Hersey, she is Canon's daughter, but she's the youngest member of our team. She's filming today. And also Ito Masahiro-san, Shintaro-san, and he's our advisor. He's a former environment minister in former administration. And He's a filmmaker. So he's our advisor today. Thank you very much for coming. And he's going to have a good question for us in the Q&A. And also Hada-san, Yoshihiko Hada, is a financial person, fundraising, chief of fundraising. So he's a bulldog. So she's going to such a force for us to come together. And he introduced us to Kawamura-san. He's a member here. So that's why we're here, having this wonderful opportunity. So we thank you, everybody, for this. So better part of the past 20 years, we spent a lot of time talking about what we can do, dealing with these social issues, especially nuclear issues and war in general. Many people argue that we're practically at the nuclear war today. It never happened that America bombing the nuclear facility in Iran. It never happened before. It is happening. So we're at the nuclear war. We're in the danger. And it's not only about that we are making this film. It's about friendship. It's about humanity. That's the bottom line. And then it's about trust building. So we hope we can make deep storytelling and narrative that tells, it's a popular culture. It's not the book. It's not the documentary. It's a popular movie that's going to tell many people around the world to recognize the importance of humanity and trust each other. So maybe we can roll the film. じゃあ、ビデオお願いします。This is the first film we produced 10 years ago for NHK and internationally shown. It's about the beginning of our journey.
The screen is over here on the right.
My name is Canon Hersey. I came to Japan to trace my grandfather, John Hersey's footsteps. He wrote a journalistic work entitled Hiroshima in 1946 that told the US and the world about the human toll of the atomic bombing. I began my research at Yale University and set out to understand my grandfather's experience. Hiroshima changed his life. Hiroshima tells the stories of 6 hibakusha, or atomic bomb survivors. I visited my family and historians to explore the background of the publication of Hiroshima. Unknown stories surfaced from the shadows. I learned how my grandfather took a stand against the US government's decision to drop the atomic bomb. After publishing Hiroshima, I don't know why my grandfather decided to stay silent. He taught me to always respect people beyond race, religion, and nationality. I asked questions about the meaning of Hiroshima. I met with the only living survivor from the book Hiroshima.
He tried to help, but there were so many of them.
She has lived with unforgettably difficult experiences. With the words my grandfather left behind, I looked deep into the shadow left by the atomic bombings. My journey to find my own Hiroshima continues.
And so many hours searching at Yale University, where John Hersey's memos, manuscript, everything was kept. And we did a lot of research out of there, yeah?
Yeah, I think that as family, to John Hersey, we dug in different places than most historians had looked. So the letters between my grandmother and my grandfather, for instance, were sort of hidden material in the archive, even very hard to find. And you really saw the emotions that were shared between the two of them and the belief in a better world, what drew them together. And we actually came across the letter which unlocked the knowledge of how John Hersey got to Hiroshima in the first place, which was through family relationships of my grandmother. We found the letter where she opened the door for John Hersey from China to enter Japan.
The city of Hiroshima was shut down by Mr. MacArthur. The GHQ shut down. No journalists, don't come. So that's why John went, yeah?
So my family, the Cannon Sheets and Towels family, the Francis Ann's family, had done sheets and towels for the war effort in World War I and World War II. So when the Standing General came to America, he was from North Carolina, and he came to my family and gave an antique samurai sword to my great-grandfather and said, the war is over. And my grandmother stepped in and said, my husband is in China and would like to come to Japan. And General Eichelberger opened the door for my grandfather to enter Hiroshima. And so these memories, these feelings, these thoughts, became very clear. The story expanded, and we started to see a much deeper story, a story that was largely hidden because my grandfather was a very private man, and it was a very controversial decision to write the book Hiroshima, and came with a lot of stress and pressure, government pressure, and he never spoke about his experience until the early 90s or late 80s when he did a Paris Review interview. But his entire life, he hadn't done a public press conference or public speech with Chugoku Shimbun in Hiroshima. Chugoku Shimbun, that had invited him 40 years later, really asked him to do a press conference, and he reluctantly agreed. But, largely he felt that the words on the page should tell the story, and that it wasn't his job to speak for the Hibakusha, that they were very good at speaking for themselves. And in digging the papers, Taku and I found a much bigger story, a story that we felt needed telling, and it was an amazing experience making these first 2 documentaries. We'd go on to make 4 more documentaries with NHK based on my grandfather's life experience. And we know Donald Rosenfeld, one of our other producers, and Robin Rosenfeld. Donald and I were becoming very close as we are working on a dramatic series on the life of Eleanor Roosevelt, another world peace leader. And I told him the story one afternoon walking in the park about John Hersey and Hiroshima, and immediately he said, we have to make this movie. And it's really become, Donald was the producer behind Remains of the Day, Howard's End. He was the president of Merchant and Ivory Productions, one of the greatest independent producers of our time. And it's amazing to bring that quality of production, that quality of historic drama into the work. I don't know, you're okay. So these are some of the films that Donald has made. Tsuchiya, Robin, Taku, and I are 5 producers working to make this production. And it's an exciting point in the road in that we've been 3 years developing and we're ready to make a movie now. We have by the end of next week, we'll have a finished script, and we're preparing. We've really been in hard pre-production for about 2 months now.
It's been an amazing journey, especially when, that was 3 years ago, right? In 2022, we opened the date, the Yale University told us there's a final batch that's now ready to be viewed. And we rushed to Yale University. What we found was amazing. The most amazing discovery was Tanimoto Kiyoshi, the Japanese reverend who was a survivor. He's a Nagarekawa church reverend who survived the bomb. And he saw everything. He saw the hell. He saw everything. He helped hundreds of people, but he had to suffer all these trauma. And he is actually main protagonist of a film to tell the story of Hiroshima. And Kiyoshi Tanimoto is pretty famous in Hiroshima, but not very well known in Japan even, and in the world. So this is kind of like an attempt to revive his legacy, Kiyoshi Tanimoto. And we found his diary That was amazing discovery, yeah?
Yeah, it was in English. Is a memoir of his, first 2 years experience after the atomic bomb, and it really brought you onto the ground in Hiroshima in a way that most people haven't really had a chance to see. And we're working with a major publisher. I don't want to announce it, but it will be published globally, and the public will get a chance to really, hear the story of Kiyoshi in his own words. And we'd been sort of searching, following Kiyoshi's journey. The first trip to Hiroshima, I brought his handwritten note to his daughter, to Coco Kondo, and that was, she had always heard of this handwritten note that he had given to John Hersey, but I brought her a copy, and it really sealed a friendship, and we've become closest of friends. My daughters look to her as an aunt. We've spent time, all three girls, in Hiroshima extensively with Coco. We celebrated her 80th birthday last year.
We're going to see her tomorrow.
And we'll have dinner with her tomorrow night. But I think that the story that John brought to the world, what was so important about John Hersey's Hiroshima, was that it moved away from the power of the bomb and focused on the human story. It really allowed you to feel for the first time, I think, for many Americans, that Japanese people were just like us. And it allowed people in America to see those survivors as if they were their friend or their priest or their doctor or their aunt, in a way that during war we lose that humanity. We forget about our shared humanity and how much closer we are to each other than far away. And that was something that my grandfather, that was part of his core, was that he felt that people were people. He saw himself as an internationalist. He was born in China and spoke Mandarin before he spoke English. So he really, coming to Japan, he had been raised in China, so there was a lot of tension in his feelings, his emotions coming to Japan. In 1939 he came the first time, and when he came to Hiroshima, but he met Kiyoshi. It's amazing to meet an English language speaker. Kiyoshi had been educated at Emory University in America, so he spoke fluent English, and they sort of connected almost, it was actually, John was seeking him out. He left a letter. They found each other, but Kiyoshi became the guide who opened the door to most of the survivors that he wrote about. And I think that, my grandfather was the son of missionaries, so he was from the church, but I think through the war had lost his belief in a lot of ways. And I think that their shared belief was in humanity. And I think that that's the driving force of our movie also, is that we can go from worst of enemies to best of allies. We can look at the world today and see a world at war, but, we can get past that and we can find each other again. I think that, we're in a point of othering each other to such a degree that we don't see each other as people anymore. We see each other as other much of the time. And I think that this movie's deepest meaning is that we can build a better tomorrow out of the rubble. We have to face the challenges, and we have to embrace each other, and we have to forgive each other. Or not forgive, we can't forget, but we have to find harmony. And I think that, coming to Hiroshima the first time, the taxi driver on the way to the airport in New York said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to Hiroshima." He said, "Oh, that's the most famous city in the world." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because of the atomic bomb." And I think that Hiroshima carries so much more. And I think that the world needs those stories of resilience today. They need the stories of what it is to build after destruction. And so that's...
In the first account, the most amazing part of that discovery, we found the Kiyoshi Tanimoto diary all typed up in 230 pages. People knew he wrote the diary, but never published, never known to public. But we found it. It was we're stunned. It's like a national treasure level discovery. So, and that really unlocked our imaginations because we knew we were going to make a film about John Hersey to Hiroshima because we did a lot of research on how he did it. It's not about the book, but about how he did it. So we discovered a lot of stuff. But Kiyoshi's voice, Hibakusha's voice, super important. I spent past 30 years. Every year I go to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, listen to Hibakusha's story, and bring those to the world. That's my life's mission. So for us, it was very important. And you've been spending a lot of time with Hibakusha, Koko-san and Keiko-san. So for us to make a movie, it's not about American gaze to Japan or American journalists' view on what happened in Hiroshima. It has to be Hibakusha's point of view too. Now we have Kiyoshi's diary, his voice, his witness account is in there. And most important part, I think it's the first encounter between John and Kiyoshi. Kiyoshi wrote that, actually John said to Kiyoshi that I came here for the humanity point of view. That was the first thing he said to Kiyoshi. And Kiyoshi trusted him because he knew that they are not reported. The fact the hundreds of thousands of people suffered and died, and hundreds of thousands others still suffering, and people dying every day with radiation sickness. Kiyoshi almost died. Kiyoshi, his wife and daughter, almost died in January of radiation sickness. They survived, but every week they see somebody dies in his neighborhood. So in that background, John Hersey came, and he said, I'm here for the humanity point of view. So for Kiyoshi, that was liberation, because he knew we are erased from history. You know, if you write this story for the world, or unless you tell the world our story, we are going to be killed twice, erased from history. That's unbearable. So that was Kiyoshi in his diary, and that really gave us the deeper motivation of making this movie. It's the two men's journey, friendship, but it's not easy friendship. They were enemies only 6 months before, but they became the closest of allies because of the truth telling. You know, they shared to tell the truth, and that really sealed the deal between them. And telling the truth is challenged today. It's very, very difficult. You know, truth itself is challenged today. So this movie is also about how truth can be told. They did it in 1946 and changed the course of history. So there's a big lesson in there. I'm a journalist for 40 years now, since 1986. So that is a big part of my motivation of making this movie as well.
Yeah, I would say that the sort of an underlying metaphor of the movie is the idea of the survivor tree or the hibaku jimoku. As a visual artist, I've been making art about this symbol. And on my first trip to Hiroshima, I fell into a certain amount of sadness and depression. And Tomoko Watanabe, one of the lead organizers in Hiroshima, who takes care of these trees. There are 160 trees that survived the atomic bomb within 1 kilometer of the epicenter, and that still thrive today. And so I've spent, years photographing 60 or 70 of them. And, the symbol of the resilience of nature to grow and to survive. And I, heard many stories from many survivors about that springtime, which is sort of a central time in our movie, when John Hersey came to Hiroshima, that you started to see flowers again, that the oleander flower was the first to grow, a very tiny flower, and children found that flower for the first time. And it brought such sense of hope back, after hearing that nothing would grow for 75 years. When the green hit the trees, when the cherry blossoms came again, I think it was like an awakening of hope. And so, a big underlying metaphor in our movie are the hibaku jimoku. We'll certainly take you deeply into what Hiroshima and what Japan were like before the war, before the bomb. You'll really see the thriving city, the beautiful city of Hiroshima, what the Genbaku Dome looked like before. And then we'll take you into the darkness of that day, perhaps one of history's darkest days, probably. This is one of only 8 photographs that were taken that day. by a Chugoku Shimbun photographer that could hardly lift his camera with the tears coming down his face to capture these stories. And we'll see the tension between an occupying government, MacArthur, who had known John Hersey, who John Hersey wrote about, and what it was like to get into Hiroshima in the first place, and what it was like to get out and to take the story out of Hiroshima.
Gannon, can I step in just to ask you to take us back a little bit to your first trip to Hiroshima? I mean, we saw a few scenes of you wandering the Shotengai and at the train station, but tell us a bit about what it was like for you to encounter Hiroshima. I mean, obviously you'd read your grandfather's book, but to actually be there to start talking to Hibakusha, what was that process like for you?
I mean, my sort of life experience has been a lot to do with making art about social issues. I believe that art and film and music are the true language of social change, and that people need that language to understand what hope could look like. And so I was in Russia in 1992 on a theater exchange program called Peace Child. I spent 10 years working deeply in South Africa after apartheid. I really learned about how change is possible. And coming to Hiroshima, it really was one of the hardest trips I'd ever taken. Spending deep experience with people who had suffered so much and were unheard, and had continued to be largely unheard, and understanding their wisdom, their wisdom about war, about weapons. Some of the things that resonated the most were that it's not just about atomic bombs, it's about war. And that Hiroshima has witnessed 1,000 years of war. That Hiroshima is not just a place of the atomic bomb, but as a trade route into Japan. That Satuchi Sea, the area, has really been through so much war that the people of Hiroshima can truly view what peace could be. And I think that it's one of the few cities in the world that truly raises the flag for peace in this time. And so I was able to, both feel a deep sadness, but then through the friendships and care of people that were looking out for us, I was able to, hug my first survivor tree, which sounds a little strange, but it really, Tomoko Watanabe, who's quite a formal lady, took me to meet my first Hibaku Jimoku in the middle of feeling very sad and overwhelmed, and it really grounded me in what we're here to do. And Isabella was 12 at that point, and my second daughter was just born, was 1, and it was hard looking out, at what had happened there, what people were capable of. And I think that it really helped me turn the corner to meet that tree and to think about resilience. And I think that really became, at the end of our filming, we ran a workshop with a leadership training for young people. And we had participants from America, from Canada, from China, from South Africa, working alongside of their Japanese friends and making art as a response to hearing history. Many tears were shed, many deep experiences were had. But in the end, it was their hope also and their belief in a brighter tomorrow that sort of brought us up and out. And our film kind of ends with that transformational experience with those young leaders that are working for change in their communities, and then how much they took away. And it just put us on a path where we couldn't just come and tell a story, make a movie, and go away. That we were embraced in such a deep way that we were part of the Hiroshima culture now. And that's what's really driven Taku and I and our company, One Future, to do so much annual work, education programming, learning together with the art community of Hiroshima, and bringing that out to the world because of the power of that. But yeah, it was a truly transformational, when the cherry blossom hits in Hiroshima, there's nothing like that in the world. When you
he's very modest. He's been doing unbelievable work, educating people, communicating to the world. We're from New York, and so we have lots of friends in New York. So we kind of opened the door for many people. Canon does it with art, remarkable art. We could talk a little bit about that because I read John Hersey's Hiroshima when I was 17. In American high school, I was an exchange student in Tacoma, Washington, and I read Hiroshima in American high school with senior class. So I was very impressed with John Hersey, and I want to be this, and I want to be a journalist. That's why I'm here, thanks to John Hersey to Hiroshima. So it's a full circle coming back to make a film about his doing things. But when we met with Canon, and I told him that I owe your grandfather to be who I am, and let's make a documentary. And we started to work on it. And I kind of forced him to be in that very tough place that to experience listening to Hibakusha is not easy. You know, John Hersey did it in 1946, May to June. Only 10 days he was there, but he listened to 50 survivors, wrote a story about 6 people. But I'm a documentary filmmaker, so I kind of have to force him to do a tough thing. And he was depressed. But he met with these beautiful trees, and of course, people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, so we documented everything. But pinnacle of that is like art, because Canon speaks the art language of art. So liberate his thoughts and experience. John Hersey did it with pen. Wonderful work. The book Hiroshima is wonderful, still a pinnacle book. But he's been doing this through art, through the portrait of Hibakusha people, photography, and Hibaku or Jimoku, the trees, very, very beautiful trees, making a silkscreen work. And now we're making Future Memory project, which is about artifacts that's affected by an atomic bomb. We have a full cooperation from the Genbaku Museum, Peace Memorial Museum from Hiroshima. So we picked the most important object, and he's making a beautiful art piece.
Yeah, we just finished a 4-foot by 4-foot bronze sculpture of a piece of wood impacted by the atomic bomb that was delivered to a private collection in Florida about a month ago. And last year we placed a tricycle, the famous tricycle object. We did high resolution. It's Akira Fujimoto, a Tokyo-based artist, and myself have been working on Future Memory for about 10 years now. And thanks to Kamizo-san here, who helped sort of open the door from the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum to really allow us to scan at highest quality objects that have been impacted by the atomic bomb at 12K quality, and make silkscreens, and now making bronze sculptures. So we made the tricycle, and it's on permanent installation at the Red Cross Museum in Geneva, Switzerland. It's the first thing you see when you enter, and it's the last thing you see when you leave. And I think that, you know, in 1,000 years, when people look back on this time, I hope they will look at it as a brutal time of war. And from a peace perspective, they'll look back at the madness of humanity at this time because of the peace that's been won. And I think that film and art and music are often the language of change. Like when people really lean into their darkest place, they'll listen to a song to bring them up again. Or sometimes art can change someone in one viewing. It can really change your perspective. And so I think that this movie also is one of those pieces of art that will change the society. And it's really such an honor to have such an amazing group of people come around our family legacy. And it's not something that my grandfather probably would have liked to see, a movie about himself, because he was such a quiet man.
I'm curious, Canon and Taku, why you think it has become possible to tell this story on the big screen finally. I mean, as I kind of alluded to earlier, I don't think there has been certainly an American production of a feature film that shows the reality of Hiroshima on the ground. Even Oppenheimer, which came out recently, there's that one flashback scene for those of you who've seen the film where Oppenheimer is kind of encountering the impact, but you never see the reality on the ground. The film is not about what's happening in Hiroshima. Why, other than the fact, obviously, of your personal legacy, which is incredibly important here, but why do you think the moment has become right for this production to happen?
I think I can take the question. We spent a lot of time contemplating making a film. Past 20 years, we've been talking about making a feature film. I spent better part of 31 years dealing with hibakusha in Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and United States too. But also, I've been a journalist to interview people like William Perry, the former the defense secretary of the United States. He's the one who started to say the world without nuclear weapons. Mr. Obama inherited the policy, and he couldn't do anything to reduce the weapon, but he talked about moral awakening to get out of the logical fear. So that's the spirit. And I've been doing a documentary about those American politicians, policymakers, hibakushas in the US. And it's always impossible to reconcile the idea of we need this weapon. People who has it, or policymakers, US, Russia, Israel, they said we need this weapon to maintain peace. That's their logic. And of course, for hibakushas and for people who don't have the weapon, it's just the evil. It's just there to kill everybody. So it's not necessary. It's absolute evil for hibakusha survivors. That's always they always say. And there's a necessary evil aspect for geopolitics. So we've been talking about how to reconcile this. We need to have a common ground, and it should be a popular culture, with moral awakening. So that's why we're doing this, and we're seeing a gradual change in people's mindset, especially past 10 years. Mr. Obama visited Hiroshima 2016, gave the famous speech. Part of the speech quoted our documentary we made in 2015 about Koko Kondo. And then eventually, I think people's mindset started to change. 2017, ICANN won the Nobel Peace Prize. It's become more and more talked about subject. In 2022, invasion of Ukraine, I think it's really changed the mindset in US too. People were not interested in talking about nuclear weapons at all in 2015 when we started the documentary, but now people do. And I think that's the backdrop that Oppenheimer was successful. People were aware and doing more stuff.
I also think it's the belief of many people in this room, that's pushed us forward also. I think that it's people demanding that the time is now, and that people supporting these stories. And I think that when my grandfather revisited Hiroshima only the second time, after 1946, he came for the first time in the 80s, mid-80s. And he talked about walking around the Peace Park and seeing in his mind's eye what it had been like that day, and just not being able to shake that memory. And speaking about the importance of the hibakusha and the willingness to visit that darkest hour and share that story with the world, that is what has kept us from the use of another atomic bomb. But what will happen when there are no more hibakusha left to tell the story? What will save us from ourselves? And I think culture is that language, and this film will be that story that will help keep that voice alive. And that's what I feel about the making of art as well.
I'm going to open things up for you all in a moment, so get your questions ready. But I wanted to ask, you talked about the film taking us into that day, into the hell of the bombing itself. And I'm sure there are countless aesthetic, ethical, interpersonal quandaries that raises. So I'd love to hear a bit more from both of you about how you're grappling with what it means to bring this to life in film. How are you going to recreate this scene? What do you have to think about? What are the considerations you're facing in doing that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we were told by many of the survivors themselves was, don't sugarcoat this. Don't do us a disservice. And so the writer-director has been, very passionately, very committed to this work. And I feel like we are at such a good place with the script that we feel very, very solid in the depiction of the resilience and the hope, but also the depiction of the real hardship and horror. And I think that it's just as John Hersey did, it's through the human experience. We really let it live in the life that was lived by those core characters connected to the book. The heroism, the sorrow, the suffering, the horror that people lived. We can't avoid that. It has to be on the screen. But also the other side of it, that John Hersey and Kiyoshi finding that trust, and the way that the people of Hiroshima were rebuilding, even in the spring, only 8 months after, people were busy rebuilding their lives. And I think that we cannot avoid to really tell it as it was, but it's important to us to also show the resilience and the hope that people built.
Yeah, it really is a remarkable story. And again, if you haven't read the book, highly recommend that you do. And that obviously we all see the film when it comes out. I'd like to open things up to the floor for questions. Also, if you're watching online, please send in questions in the chat and we will collect them. Let's start over on this side on the far right, and we'll work our way over.
Thank you. It was very exciting and illuminating to hear all of this. And one way I think people will look at this is that this movie will be Japan's answer to the movie Oppenheimer, although very different angle on Oppenheimer doesn't really talk about the effect of the bomb on the ground. That's how people will look at it. And I've been talking with both of you, Taku and Cannon, and I know what you're doing in Japan, but how have you been addressing the people in the US about this movie thus far? Just curious.
Yeah, I think it's a complex moment in America, and it's a moment of a lot of fear and confusion. And I think that in these times we have to really be as honest and true to ourselves as we can, and really share our stories. And I think that it's been 10 years of this work, and we've brought the art community of Hiroshima to New York and shared their music and their art. And I think that we continue to work in the education space and share with young people the experiences. And I think that the world is looking for symbols of hope and resilience in this time. And I think that COVID was perhaps the closest the world came to understanding what it was like to be in Hiroshima and not know what the silent killer was. People didn't really understand anything about radiation sickness. And so I think that changed and opened up a lot of hearts and minds to, finding hope after a very dark time. And so I think that the conditions are right for this type of sharing and story. And I think that, Americans, like all people, are looking for answers. And they, in many years in the past, they found it through the gods. And I think people are looking for new answers in this time. Buying things is not enough to satisfy one's spirit or one's being. And I think people look for meaning. And so I think this film resonates meaning for people from anywhere. And I think Coco is like a celebrity in New York. People love her so much because she fills them with hope and joy and makes them laugh. And many survivors carry that ability to sort of transcend their pain through lived experience. Like Toshika Tanaka is another amazing artist, painter from Hiroshima who just makes you feel so good when you spend time with her. And I think that rebuilding after destruction is a life calling for people. So I think people look for that opportunity to be their best self. We're just not offered it that much. And I think that, in the stories of Hiroshima is a lot of sadness. There's a lot of trauma, but there's also a lot of amazing, resilient energy that allows people to imagine what they could do themselves in their own way. So I think that's the resonating story of Hiroshima that many people leave with, is not just, my grandfather's book really takes you into the horror of that day. And I think that was a large reason why we didn't want to and won't make that direct book into a film. It's too much horror and not enough hope. And I think that our movie has a lot more to offer people than, not to discredit the power of this book. This book changed the world in many ways. But I think that our film carries a different meaning.
And we speak a lot of people in the United States too, liberal crowd, conservative crowd, lots of people. And Ito-san, you warned us there are people who are opposed to this film. So inevitably, come on, we're talking about Genbaku, the atomic bombing by United States to Japan. So, and never been done before. This is the first U.S.-Japan co-production to deal with this very subject in a very, very straight way. So inevitably, it's going to be political, but we're not here to make a political statement about, of course, I feel for Hibakusha, but I also feel for John. And for American crowd, John Hersey's Hiroshima is such a journalistic achievement. It's a hero story. When no one was allowed to go in there, and no one was, everyone was restricted to write about this. Government, White House, GHQ, everybody said, don't write this. And that's why John Hersey did it. And that's a good story for any public, especially U.S. audience. So we're getting a favorable reaction to, okay, you're telling that story, that the hero's story. So
Well,
that's one
an important story to tell these days in America, certainly. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm very happy to see you finally, because we already crossed paths in New York, where I was end of September. And my question goes in the same direction, basically. How do you intend to create the greatest impact, and how do you distribute the documentary? And when is actually the launch date? And how?
This is a drama film, so this will be a major drama feature film with an A-list star as John Hersey and with some of Japan's greatest actors, playing Kiyoshi Tanimoto. It's an independent movie, so it'll be made outside of traditional distribution and studio system. It'll be made independently, and we've taken the time. We felt we needed to make the best project, not rushed by a distributor. Donald Rosenfeld is a legend of distributing great movies around the world through Merchant and Ivory. He also made Tree of Life, Terrence Malick's movie that won the Palme d'Or at Cannes Film Festival. So yeah, it's a great team, and it'll have a market. The Oppenheimer certainly paved the path for the opportunity to make this movie. It showed that people wanted to see a movie about the nuclear bomb and the power of the bomb. I think that this is a follow-up film that people will have to see. So I think that helps. In the impact space, that's really our deepest passion, and we. All of our producers, but also Taku and I very deeply have been committed to the education space and bringing people to Hiroshima. And we, as a team, have committed 10% of our profits to ongoing impact work. So we'll be able to create a sizable fund for the nonprofit work addressing the history and also the future of Hiroshima. So that's at core to our work. We've been doing conversations around the world. We had a great conversation at Oxford with the former president of Ireland, Mary Robinson, with 30 top foundations. We've been having conversations during Climate Week in New York with top environmental organizers, heads of the biggest organizations in the world. And we've been really, traveling around the world, having these conversations for 11 years. But on an accelerated pace the last 9 months as we, really try to lean into what difference can we make, what difference will we make. And so that nonprofit side of what we do is at core to why we do this. It's something that Taku and I have been investing in, personally, just as we make documentaries. We've been coming to Hiroshima and doing an annual program. And we believe that Hiroshima has the opportunity to help bring peace in Asia. And that gathering people to Hiroshima once a year, like a South by Southwest of Asia, has the potential to change hearts and minds and really lean into peace across the region. And so that will be funded, partially by the profits from the movie. We're headed to Hiroshima tomorrow to have dinner with Coco and to do our exhibition and music program and show films. And the Metropolitan Museum curator of Japanese art is coming with 35 trustees from the Met. So we'll have a very wonderful group of people. join us, and people are interested. People want to know. And, you know, when that curator of Japanese art, we had lunch about a year and a half ago, he said, you know, people want to know. Oppenheimer changed the game. People want to know about the history. And people from the Met who are, you know, both conservative and liberal want to come and spend time here and listen to the stories. So I think that that's the shift that's happening. And I think it's the beginning of a much larger discussion that will unfold for the next 10 years or 90 years.
Thank you very much. I'm a student, and last semester I took an art class where for my final project I was looking at artistic output in response to Hiroshima, specifically artistic depictions of human body devastation, very, very difficult to look at and to interact with. And recently I showed my final presentation that I gave to one of my friends. And I think they said something along the lines of, "Oh yeah, that is tragic, but I've seen these pictures before. These just pictures. I see pictures of violence every day, right?" And desensitization to these kind of pictures is very, very dangerous. So I was wondering if you've yourself ever experienced this kind of this shock moment of seeing these pictures is not that tremendous anymore, or if you've seen it around you that people become desensitized specifically to Hiroshima and pictures of that.
Yeah, I think about this every day. You know, when we are making this film, we started to talk about how we depict, because now we have a very detailed account of, you know, written by Kiyoshi Tanimoto himself. He saw the hell. It's very graphic, very gruesome, how people died, how people's body was melted and dissolving. So, and I've been doing a documentary about the Hibakusha subject for 30 years, but mostly for public television. So it's been restricted, watered down year after year. And as Cannon mentioned, when we started to talk about this film, graphic nature of this film, every Hibakusha survivors said, do the right thing. Don't sugarcoat it. We saw what we saw, but people are forgetting. And this is our last chance to tell the real truth. So we will show the hell. And we think about this. It's a very good question, desensitizing. You know, it's like shock porn. You know, people are looking at people killed in Gaza every day. You know, babies' bodies everywhere. You know, that's been in our psyche already. And we don't want to be insensitive about this. So it's a very fine line we have to think about. So we consult with survivors, and we have NHK Director veterans. We have lots of minds put into this to how to visualize. And of course, there's a technical aspect to it. There's going to be a VFX, and Tsuchiya-san and I always talk about how we approach this. And of course, it has to be scientifically correct. You know, and we have lots of experience. I made a lot of documentaries about Hibakushas and depiction of it and analyzing the photos that's left. So we will do our best. But bottom line is we will show what it was. And this is the first time, really, to show what it was on big screen. And it's going to be shocking. It's going to be controversial. There's going to be lots of social discourse happened, which Oppenheimer totally avoided, but we will not avoid it. So that's our answer for now. But it's a very good point. You know, we don't want to be insensitive about this, and we'll be mindful of that.
And I think just bringing a human story to tragedy and allowing people to feel connection or relationship, or you know, for people to feel like they might know these people, that these people are like their friends or like their relatives, I think was the success of my grandfather's book, was that after a brutal war and a lot of bad, you know, media, a lot of, you know, stereotyping, a lot of othering between America and Japan, it was in the human story that was how people were able to connect really to that tragedy, because they felt like they knew these people. And I think that that's certainly something that we've been working very hard to get right, is to really allow people to see, you know, not everyone's perfect, but there are heroes that are real. There are real heroes in the world. And I think Kiyoshi really lived as an amazing person And on that day, he really was like a superhero in a lot of ways. I mean, how he saved and worked to save so many people, and he wasn't hurt because he was on the top of the mountain. And so and I think that the way that that's starting to live in the project is remarkable. And I think that human story, I think, is what makes it more than just an image. And then you get beyond the image to the people, and that's where humanity comes back after war. And I think the fact that they were able to find that 8 months after the war gives me hope for Israel and Palestine. It gives me hope for Russia and Ukraine. I think that when people connect through person-to-person relationship and hear about each other's children or hear about each other's things they like to do or things they find funny, or when you get the humanity in there, that's where people can have a deeper relationship to what that hurt is or that trauma is. So.
I have two quick questions. The first question is, can you explain the thinking behind the title? When I first saw the title, I was a little bit confused because clearly division existed between U.S., Japan, and the war and the interpretation about the bombing and so forth. And you can certainly think about division now within the United States. But between the U.S. and Japan, there's actually been reconciliation. And the relationship between U.S. and Japan now is quite good. So I'm a little confused. What was the thinking behind the title? And I mean, what specifically are you going to refer to in the movie about what divides us now? The second question is that in 2020, there was a book about your grandfather, which got quite a bit of attention. And I think the title was Fallout, the Hiroshima cover-up and the reporter who revealed it to the world. What is your assessment of this book? Is it an accurate book?
I mean, we dug the archives of the New Yorker with a top NHK team, and I didn't see 10 days of getting feedback or waiting for notes from the War Department. I saw 1 day, and that's all I found in the archives. So I felt, for me personally, like really digging in the papers, I think it's an exciting book, but I don't think certain key elements are factual. So I think that the way that the New Yorker dealt with the War Department throughout the war, the way William Shawn, the editor, dealt with the War Department, it was really one-day review. It's a small publication. It's a funny magazine. I know that Leslie Groves did personally put his hand on the edit, but I think that it was a year after the war. I think things were starting to change in America. I think there was still a lot of fear around it, and there had been a presidential decree not to tell the human story, so they were going directly against that. But I think that, in my understanding, some of the basis of that was a little over-exemplified.
And I get this question all the time: what divides us? Why it's called what divides us? It's a conversation starter. Why? And we start the conversation like this. It came from Donald Rosenfeld came up with the title. He's of Jewish descent, and he knows a lot of Holocaust survivors from Auschwitz and elsewhere. And Elie Wiesel, a very famous author, Nobel Prize winner, he wrote the book The Night. And within that book, there is this passage: what unites us is much greater than what divides us. So it came from that. So, of course, we're talking about humanity. We're talking about truth-telling. We're talking about true friendship that unites us. But before what unites us, there is a huge amount of what divides us. So that's what we are kind of using that as a kind of twisted thing. But, we thought it's twist. But now such a division exists in front of us today. So it becomes like a direct question: what's dividing us? And I think that's a question everybody's asking, in communities, in politics, in culture too. So I think what divides us is that kind of title to have a conversation started. What's dividing you? Or what's dividing your community? What's dividing between our countries? So I think that's the question we're asking. And naturally, we're trying to come up with what unites us. So that's the type of answer I give.
First of all, your grandfather's book is amazing. So concise, so efficient and yet so specific and so detailed. It's just an amazing piece of work. But my question is about the diaries of Pastor Kiyoshi Tanimoto. So he lived in America. He went to school in America, and then he went to Japan, as I understand it. So like many Japanese Americans, like my ancestors, Issei, Nisei, dealt with this. We're between two countries. What did he write about his experience as a person who had lived and worked in America and then was in Hiroshima? What was his thinking? And this is during the war, right? And so what was that like, according to his diaries?
I mean, he also had some transformational experiences in Korea. Some life-changing experiences in Korea. And I think that Kiyoshi was also an internationalist. And I think he loved Coca-Cola. He loved, what he learned at Emory. He had lifelong friendships that he built studying in America.
Emory.
Emory, yeah.
Wow. Georgia.
And in Georgia. And I think that he suffered a lot of personal trauma in his own upbringing. And he became a Christian in a Buddhist family. He was expected to become a Buddhist. His mother died and had a heart attack on the way to try to convert him back to Buddhism. And so there's a lot of sadness in his personal journey. And I think sometimes people that suffer the most and have a lot of personal pain that they grow with become the most caring and most sensitive to other people's experiences.
And we spent a lot of time, past 10 years, reading his account of what happened, and now we found the diary. So, and that made the movie, the gave such a depth for our storytelling. Kiyoshi-san had this background, brought up in Buddhist family, but turned into a Christian. And he was disowned by his father. His registration, koseki, was erased. And he went to Emory College. He went to Kansei Gakuin University, and he went to Emory, spent a couple of years. He became a priest. He became a reverend in Georgia, and he was stationed in Los Angeles. He belonged to church before coming back to Japan. So he spent 3-4 years in the United States. Of course, he talks about a lot of that experience. And then he came back to became a reverend. He was stationed in Okinawa first. He spent a few years, and he came to Hiroshima, Nagarekawa Church in 1942 or 43, a few years before the bombing. So his association, his affiliation, his feeling with America is very strong. He has lots of friends. He has lots of people who made him who he was, and he continued to do so. We found the interview, the interview on documentary by NHK. When we're making documentary, he's talking about, I owe myself to United States, American people, especially those reverends who taught me the Christianity. So I owe them a lot. But America, the Christian nation, dropped the bomb and brought this hell. So his desperation is very, very deep.
Was he viewed with suspicion in Japan?
Well, he was because he has these close associations. He was very careful. During the war, lots of American reverends, they were sent home. They're enemy nation, and American and British and English-speaking people are labeled enemy. So he was very careful, but he was like rumored as a spy, for example, after the war too. So he had that very difficult time, but he kept on going because his belief in God is very strong, but he couldn't believe in humanity. At that moment, in 1945, 46, there's no hope for him to tell that story, but John Hersey came. And John Hersey, as you mentioned, he was brought up in church in Tenzin, China, by missionary parents. So he understood the system of God, system of church is not really perfect. So he became he's a non-believer. So he doesn't believe in God, but believe in humanity through writing. What he wrote during the war is about humanity. What does humanity exist in this absolute situation? And his writing is about, yes, humanity exists. So that's why he won the Pulitzer Prize in 1944 with Belfort Dano. So there's this person who believed in God, but lost faith in humanity. In Hiroshima, Kiyoshi Tanimoto. And there's this person who came to Hiroshima by lots of twists and turns, but he's not non-believer, don't believe in God, but believe in humanity. So they needed each other. So those are the kind of study we found out through studying their account of, witness account and their thinking. So that became the core story of our film, What Divides Us. So they found each other and tell the true story.
The presumption that the atomic bombs caused or forced the Japanese military to surrender has been debunked several times by major American authors and historians. Herbert Bix, for example, John Dower in Embracing Defeat. Most recently, Gary Bass has a book called Judgment at Tokyo. It's really been very clearly discussed that it was largely the Russian betrayal of the Japanese military that caused them to surrender on August 15th. The bombs were dropped on the 6th and the 9th of August. The surrender didn't occur until the 15th. Are you going to help clarify that in your film? Is that an issue you can address? Because it seems to me
it's still a big issue.
It's frustrating to me when I talk to Americans and they say, well, they ended the war. And I say, no. There are many other reasons the Japanese government surrendered on August 15th.
Yeah, I don't think that we can debunk that in our film. I think that just like I don't think we can remove nuclear weapons from the world with our film, I think that what we can do is encourage a culture of peace and love and harmony in the world and show that people can learn to love each other and trust each other, after the worst of humiliation and hurt and trauma. And I think that, my understanding is similar to yours, but I think that it's still something raised in many conversations we've had with over 500 families. Many of the most powerful families in America have heard our story. We presented our vision, and many people still respond that without the atomic bomb, the war wouldn't have ended. So it's deeply ingrained. In our documentary, we found that the Harper's Weekly, was it? Harper's Magazine, Leslie Grove's article was really kind of a response to John Hersey's Hiroshima. Henry Stimson's article, I'm sorry. That depiction of 1 million lives lost was sort of a direct response because Hiroshima was changing so many hearts and minds. Peter Kuznick from American University said Hiroshima changed 8% of America's opinion of whether we should have dropped the atomic bomb or not. So I think that there's obviously a direct relationship between the telling of that story and the claim that 1 million lives would have been lost. But I don't think it's something that we can really stop. We're not making a documentary, so it's a narrative, and I think that it's not something I see in our depiction, but it's an important subject for sure.
Thank you very much.
Komizo-san is a former director of the Peace Culture Center from Hiroshima.
Actually, I'd like to congratulate the advancement of this project, great project, and I'd like to also thank you for the devotion you have been committing yourself to peace. And in early November, for 5 days, a Pugwash conference, which was established in 1957 after the Russell-Einstein Declaration against nuclear weapons. And I am one of the panelists talking about practical steps to nuclear disarmament, one with the two panelists. And I am, under the circumstance of these divisions, I like to emphasize, because the responsibility of the political leaders, but at the same time, more importantly, I like to emphasize the role of the civil society for dialogue and inclusiveness and complementarity like orchestra. And that is probably the most important elements which we can all participate. And in that, my statement, I like to, with your permission, discuss about your very important projects, if you agree.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what we've found in Hiroshima, what's led us to a lot of our work is the importance of the round table and the importance of everyone having the right to a voice and the importance of creating more connective tissue, even between the highest level of politics and the person that feels unheard. Because we live in that time. We live in a time of disconnect, whether it's through technology, whether it's through COVID years and coming out of that time, whether it's because of all the war in the world. I think that people need each other. People need to learn to listen to each other, even if they disagree. And I think that there's nothing more important in society than spending time in dialogue and creating space for hearing someone who thinks differently than yourself. And I think that Hiroshima has a special, the fact that Hiroshima's survivors are willing to revisit this moment again and again and again and share their darkest hour with people who often think very differently than themselves, and not to fear that interaction gives me courage in this time, and I'm sure has given you a lot of courage, which you shared with us 10 years ago, and encouraged us. And you were one of the few people that really saw how hard it was for our family, to be in this position. And I think that my parents, my father and his brothers and sisters struggled to talk about it or struggled to know how to talk about it. And I was the one from 20 asked to make the speech when John was given the best piece of journalism of the 20th century, because none of the other family members wanted to be on stage and make that speech. And I think that it's a responsibility to not be the voice, but be a convener of the voices of peace in the world. And I think that that's your job. That's been your job for many, for some time.
And I really appreciate Komizu. He's the one who started it all. He took us 2015, I think it was March, when you visited for the first time in Hiroshima. Of course, we have to go to the museum. He took us around. He showed us the most important collections. And he started a way of thinking, approaching, how do we tell this story to the world, creating common ground. So I really appreciate you did that for us.
Yeah, and encouraged me as an artist also to really utilize the objects in the collection and reinterpret them for the world, to come back to Hiroshima, to really revisit that history. And I
also,
think,
we came up with this question, meaning of memory. Thanks to his introduction to museum, thanks to Tomoko-san's introduction to Hibaku Jumoku, everybody has memory. And retelling the memory is so important. I'm a filmmaker, documentary filmmaker, so my job past 30 years is retelling the memories of Hibakusha survivors to the world in the best way I can. But when we came across this essay, John Hersey came back in 1985, May, 39 years later. He saw the beautiful Peace Park, which was just a rubble, 39 years ago when he was there in May, June 1946. He thought, is this an illusion I'm watching, or is this real? And for him, what he saw 39 years prior was the reality, but they built this thanks to survivors. Thanks to survivors telling their memories, hard memories, to the world. Thanks to that, we've been avoiding the third usage of nuclear bombing. And he wrote beautifully that past, present, and future is linked with meaning of memory.
Yeah. How do you plan to sustain the interest, most especially addressing to the younger generation? How after the movie is made, how do you plan to, do that going forward?
Well, I'll just give a little personal story, but when I came to Hiroshima with my 3 daughters last summer and we attended the August 6th ceremony and came home, my 7-year-old, who was in 2nd grade, said, how did none of these people know about Little Boy and Fat Man? how did none of these people know about what happened in Hiroshima? This was a 7-year-old, you know, so I think that people care about people, and I think people are looking for things to believe in and stories to wrap their heart around. That's why, you know, people stand for peace in the Middle East. That's why people work for peace between Russia and Ukraine and an end to the war. And I think that that's going to drive society to change, not because of a leadership culture, but because of a civil society culture, because of a bottom-up movement, because people are moved to change. And so I think that that's sort of at core for us.
Thank you, Canon. Thank you, Taku, so much for joining us and for sharing the story of this film, the story of your family. It's, again, I think an incredibly important project, an incredibly timely one. I'd like to invite you all to give a first of what I hope will be many, I'm sure will be many rounds of applause for this film and for the tribute.
Thank you, Noah.